Right. Getting back to where we are, we're on January 3rd, 2022. It's really hard to believe it's 2022. It's also hard to believe we're in the second year of the pandemic. And we have joining us once again, Fred Brown, our epidemiologist, who's working with states, countries, and a variety of other folks out there to analyze what's going on and what we can expect. And so let's start with that, Fred. Here we are in the second year of the pandemic. No one saw this one coming, and now it's mutated into the Omicron variant. And gosh, what's going to happen next? Any ideas?
I've been working on it heavily, as you know, Mike, and it's great to be back. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances, of course, just because we were hoping that the vaccines are really going to turn things around, and unfortunately, we got caught by this Omicron variant, and it's really looking like we're fighting to a standstill right now with the overall piece. So let me show you some of the data, and we can. With the overall battle. Let me show you some of the data if I can.
All right, let me make sure I got share screen. Okay, you should have multiple, so you should be able to share.
Excellent. So let's see. There's been a lot of news, and so I don't want to repeat a lot of the things that people have already said. Let me see if I can get this onto a screen shared. How about that? So, yep. As you know, in August, I came on and I had predicted we were going to have, what happened was I was watching this overall downward curve, right? You can see that from basically January 12th or so, we just went straight down. And that was largely as a result of two things. Number one, a lot of people got infected with the beta virus variant. And we then, kind of went right down the slope, and we were watching two curves, Mike. We were watching the first curve, which said if we had perfect vaccination rates, here's what the curve would look like. And we were following that curve pretty much straight down through middle of February or to early March of 2021. And then we started to slow down the vaccination rates, and you can see that sort of also started to slow down the curves. But then we got back on, and especially when the second vaccinations were given through June, we were doing pretty well. We had over 50% of the a little bit under 50% of the population vaccinated. We were hoping for about 60-70% by that point, 65% by that point by June. And then we went into a nice valley. And remember, we were kind of celebrating. We said, I moved over to my new position at Deloitte, saying, I needed to join a bigger operation in order to affect, the kind of work that I was doing, and so I did that and been really happy with that, and then thinking that everything was going to be okay. Well, we also watched a second curve. The second curve we were watching was the curve of no vaccinations. So we had no vaccinations, and unfortunately, on August, right around the end of June, early August, we crossed the curve that should have said, here's what the no vaccination rate looks like with natural immunity if it was versus here's what it looks like with vaccine. And we crossed the curve back up. And so on August 1st, I redid my predictions. And what do you think we were at? You can imagine it kind of going up and down a little bit of a hill and then coming back down again, an even lower rate like we had in March. You can imagine it going flatlining, or you can imagine it going up. What do you think the right answer was, Mike?
It went up.
Yeah, the reason it went up is because we had the Delta variant, and that was that was disappointing. And so what I predicted on August 1st was we would go up and then come back down again once the Delta virus went through its natural course, and we increased our vaccination. So by the middle of October, I thought we would be over 75% vaccinated, and almost 80% vaccinated. Because that didn't occur, that valley you see kind of October 24th, that didn't go down for as long as I thought it would in the fall. And so that was all largely the result of the vaccination rate numbers. And so my numbers were about 20% off. And then because we didn't vaccinate globally effectively, we got the Omicron. And I thought we would be past a major variant coming in. I thought the Delta was one of our last big folds. I did predict that it was going to go up quite a bit. You can see almost to the same level, but slightly above the same level we had last year. But we've actually had, I thought we'd be at kind of 300,000, 350,000 as a predicted daily peak. We went up to about 378,000. So I was off by about 20% as a result of those two factors, I think, largely. And as a result of that, we've changed our numbers. We thought we'd be at 300,000 a day. We now think we may be as high as over 500,000 a day on a daily average basis. And we could approach 1 million cases a day, reported PCR cases. And I think it'll be over 1 million, well over 1 million, when you think about the unreported private cases that people, take their at-home test, and then they decide, well, gosh, I've got it. I don't want to go out and infect other people, confirming that I've got it with a PCR test. And so my thinking right now is that we're going to be peaking around middle of January 20th, 500,000 cases on average. What's going to happen is we're going to spike in New York and some of the major populated areas first, and that'll start coming down just as but then it'll start moving across the country, right, and down into the South. So we've seen a lot of that recently, where the South was relatively unaffected in October because people were outside and pretty well ventilated areas. We also had a slightly higher, we started to vaccinate a little bit more down there because people were kind of shocked by the Delta variant there in August. And so what happened now is that the South is catching up, and they're going to start peaking, and the West is going to start peaking a little bit later. So it's going to take us through February to head around. It'll come down fast, but it'll kind of have peaks that start right now in the upper Northeast and the Midwest where we are, and move down south and over to the West. And so the peaks will continue. And for that reason, we'll kind of peak, I think, probably around, what did I say here? I thought we would peak on January 18th or so, and we'd have our worst average weekly rate would be around 500,000 cases a day. That's a lot of cases a day, because if you think about it, last year we were at about 300,000 cases a day peaking. And that's a major increase in the number of cases we have. This Omicron variant, as we said, is about as catchable, about as spreadable as the measles. And if you're in a room with someone with the measles, you can, that one person can easily infect 20 people. Wow. So that's a real fast spread compared to, the flu, where one person's going to, kind of infect 1.5 people. That's the kind of difference that we're dealing with. And originally on the original Wuhan virus, one person was affecting kind of 2.5 people. And now we're getting up to a point of affecting at least 9 and possibly as many as 18 people by a single person. On the average numbers that people are modeling now are around 14 people. So that gives you a sense of just how much more powerful this variant is. The Delta variant was about twice as powerful, about twice to 3 times more powerful than the Beta variant, which was about twice as powerful as the original variant. This is about 3.5 to 5 times worse than the Delta. So you're starting to see just how much more advanced the Delta virus has become, right? It's sort of like it started with fighting with a small sword, and now it's become a kind of a nuclear bomb. This Omicron thing really is a bad thing. The big thing that we're modeling, Micah, is what's going to happen in April, right? Because in April, we know that we're going to be coming down this slope. And the question is, are we going to have enough people vaccinated and enough people who have natural immunity that will finally get to a point where maybe we'll have a little bit of a breather? And the big factor of this really is how much travel we're going to do, and how and that's what happened to us before, right? If we were on an island and we didn't have to worry about spread of people coming in with new variants, then after we went through this big peak, we'd come back down again, and there'd be no one left to infect, right? For 3, 4, 5 months, there'd be nobody left to infect with the virus, and the virus could die out. But unfortunately, because we have so many people coming into the country and traveling back and forth, and the variant spreads and not enough vaccination, it means that even though by April we'll come way down, but we won't. I don't really know where that curve is going to flatten out. I'm hoping that it'll flatten out below the 60,000 we were having a day at the Delta, and then when it went back up, I'm hoping it'll be down toward the 20,000 cases a day, which would put us worse than the flu. But at least at a more manageable rate. If it could be though, so that would be the absolute low would be kind of 20,000 a day, I think, with Omicron in April, around April 15th. But the high could be over 100. Could remain in the 100,000 range. And that would be a real disaster. That would be, a lot of extra pressure on the health systems. People would continually be watching out, watching over their back, having to wear masks to really prevent continued spread, lots of community spread among different populations. So hopefully we won't be at that in April 15th. So we'll go way up, we'll come way down real fast, and then it'll start to flatten out. And that big question is it going to be flattening out at 100,000 or 20,000? And right now, I'm thinking, unfortunately, that's going to be likely at around 60,000, like we had with Delta, and maybe slightly more than that, maybe 60 to 80,000. So that's not a great scenario for kind of finally getting into a situation where we can relax a little bit from the infection rate. What's nice about Omicron is we think that the death rates are down with Omicron, and I'll show you some of that data. We've had 5 scientific studies that all show that it's less infective in the lower lungs, which really cause a lot of our death rates in humans than the Delta virus, which would be great. But here I was back in August, and I was trying to predict the death rates. Is it going to flatten out again, or is it going to go back up again? And as you know, it went back up again. Here's the curve that I predicted in green. Here's the actual curve, and you can see that basically I underestimated the deaths by about 4% this year. I was much closer last year. I thought we'd be at around 789. It actually went to 823 by the end of the year, so that's a 4.4% miss. But that's because basically the Delta there was a mix of effects. The first was the vaccination rates weren't as high, so we had. I was predicting fewer deaths in October, and then I was expecting a bigger increase than we had, but that's because Omicron kind of softened the blow of the Delta growth that I was anticipating. So overall, it balanced out. We were pretty accurate. So you can see that people say that we can't really predict these things, but it is actually reasonably predictable. About these predictions were in August, so 4, 5, 6 months out. You can still get there. 3 months out is very comfortable in terms of predicting what's going to happen. So what happened in the United States? Basically, among nations, we were probably one of the worst, especially among the OECD nations, which that's who you want to compare yourself to. Those are our comparator nations in terms of wealth, health capabilities, so that our overall network. And you can see that if we had controlled COVID the way Japan had, we would have only had 49,000 deaths. We had 823,000 deaths. We would have had only 49,000. That would be a completely different environment. And right today, Japan is a pretty relaxed. It's a controlled environment, but they had a big celebration. The people I knew in Japan had big celebrations for New Year, had big celebrations for Christmas. Weren't impacted by COVID particularly, but they do wear masks. And they do have a very carefully approved set of drugs and devices they use in order to control this that we don't have worked as carefully as they have. And they've done this despite having 12 times more dense population than we do. And they're 10 years older than we are. As you know, as you get older and older, the population gets older and older, the death rates just go incredibly high, right? The death rates of people who are in their 60s are 4 times higher than those who are in their 20s, for example. And Japan is being 10 years older than we are and having such a densely populated population, you'd think, gosh, they'd have a big problem. And in fact, they haven't. And I think that's largely, we were talking a little before we started the program, and that is largely because our political leadership has been really poor in this. And it's on both sides of the equation. I work with the Trump administration, I've worked with the Biden administration, I've worked with all the different governors, many different governors, red states, blue states. And the issue is that sadly, we've become we've allowed this to become a political football. And this graph here shows basically, here is the vaccinated share on the one axis, that's the y-axis, and you can see that goes up to almost 100%. Herd immunity threshold is shown. There are very few counties. These are all the counties in all the United States and the white dots. And you can see that very few of them are actually over the herd immunity threshold. So almost nobody can go out and say, hey, no, there are enough people around me who are vaccinated. That means that I don't have to be vaccinated because I'm protected. There are 4 counties out of the thousands that we have in the United States. There's 3,000, so less than 0.01%. You can do that. and be safe. Everybody else is in a situation where they're not protected by herd immunity. And just how bad is it? Well, you can get a sense for these are the people who supported Biden on the one hand. You can see that those counties are more that's on the left-hand side of the x-axis. And on the right-hand side of the x-axis are those who supported Trump up to 100%. And you can see that sadly, those counties that were supporters of Trump, for some reason, not sure why, since actually Trump was a big supporter of Operation Warp Speed. I mean, he actually got these vaccines to market faster in world record time. But for some reason, those counties are actually unvaccinated, and as a result of that, this political football is that we now have very low overall vaccination rates. We've been unable to enforce any mandates. We don't effectively use any Defense Production Act opportunities. We have a lot of confusion in the communication. We've got delays across geography that are moving through in cycles. So you've got a wave in the south, a wave in the west, a wave in the north, and people are confused about where it's safe, where it isn't safe. And we've got no true effective strategy for communications, and you'll see that in a second. And as a result of having no national strategy, we don't have any data either to guide us, and that's what I use in order to make recommendations. We don't have very good data sets because we don't have a national strategy that says we're going to be using masks and tests in this way in order to accomplish these goals. So that's a really unfortunate situation. The other problem is that you can see that these counties are highly, and they're just snow white there in the lower right-hand corner. They're very highly concentrated. In other words, the Trump supporters tend to congregate among each other, and the Biden supporters tend to congregate among each other. And as a result of that, these congregations of very highly unvaccinated people are causing lots of spread, lots of opportunity for the virus to mutate. And so, you said a few weeks ago, gosh, it looks like there's a big issue about who's Republican and who's Democrat and how vaccinated you are. And it does look like the data bears this out. And unfortunately, you can see that among the states as well. So here is a very highly shows the correlation between at the state level. So we talked about the county level. Now we're aggregating that to the state level, and you can see there is a tremendous proportion. There's a much lower. So on the y-axis, that's the monthly death rate, and it goes to 20 per 100,000. 20 per 100,000 is the death rate is a higher death rate than exists anywhere else in the world. I think the worst is 6 per 100,000. And so that's in Peru, as I recall. So that gives you a sense of just how bad some of these states are. And unfortunately, what's happened is that whenever the Biden administration tries to enforce a mandate saying, all federal workers, all people who are working with federal government needs to be vaccinated, people who are in healthcare need to be vaccinated, people who are on the front lines need to be vaccinated. The state attorneys general come back and say, we don't want the mandates. And so, for example, right now, the big fight is the Montana. You can see Montana's within these guys in the red circles are largely the states that are fighting the mandates. And Montana has brought a court case that's filed, and that's you can see that's way up. They've got about 15 per 100,000. That puts them, if they were a country, they'd be one of the, they would twice as bad as the worst in the world right now. And versus their vaccination rate, which is just around 50%, no, 55%. That's Montana, and they brought that case in Louisiana. You can say Louisiana is 50% vaccinated, and that's and all these states, Alabama, which you can see is less than 50% vaccinated, has a very high death rate. Idaho also is even worse than Alabama, as is West Virginia, et cetera. Those are the states that are saying, no, we don't want the mandates, and yet I don't understand how they're really serving their people, because they have the highest death rates. They're fighting and pushing the rest of the country down. And it's very disappointing to see, for someone like myself who's worked so hard to bring these vaccines, to market, to have to have people somehow feel like they're representing the interests of their citizens by not allowing them to get vaccinated and congregating among lots of unvaccinated people and allowing the virus to surge is extremely disappointing.
Where does Florida rank? I was looking at I don't see them inside your circle, but I'm reading or hearing news reports that it's really, really bad down in Florida.
Yes. So Florida is actually, you can see it's way off the map. It's pretty highly vaccinated because because our older populations, people over 85 are 90% vaccinated in the United States, but they have a high death rate. So you see it there. It has the same death rate as West Virginia, but it's more vaccinated, and that's because it has such a high.
Oh yeah, now I see it. Okay,
age group, and again, because nursing homes have the mandate in them, and Florida has a lot of people in nursing homes, they have a much higher level of vaccination than the other conservative states in them, but because they're so much older than we are, and then the rest of the states, in many cases, they also have a very high death rate. So that's they would be in one of the worst countries in the world if they were a separate country. So that kind of gives you a sense of you. So you and you guys challenged me last time and said, "Gosh, Fred, it seems like it was pretty political." So I took a look at it, and you were right. It's gotten very political, and it's disappointing because these states are creating a lowest common denominator phenomenon. They're pushing everybody else down.
Well, here's one of the confusing things to me is Trump has said that he's been vaccinated, got the booster. He encouraged people to go ahead and do it and got booed at some conservative rally. So, I mean, if he's the one that's driving the politics on this, why are people not listening? Any ideas?
So all those politicians, and I work for a lot of red state politicians as well. I'm trying to help everybody. They've all been vaccinated. They've all been boosted,
Yeah.
But as Ada Hutchinson, got on, and all these people are nice people. They're all trying to do the right thing. They're all trying to represent their own people. And as Ada says, I want to have options. Well, the problem is that the options they're currently using, I'm just going to go back to this piece here. The options they're currently using, Ada is in Arkansas. Well, you can see, here's Arkansas, right? So I don't want to look like that.
Yeah.
And yet he's saying, I want more options. Well, he's using maximum number of options. And frankly, if you've got a gun, you bring and you're trying to fight the virus with the gun, and you're saying, I also want to try think about using a knife. Why would you? If you want to beat the virus, you want to beat it with something that's effective. And the problem is that there's so much misinformation out there that we're missing the point that, we do have a couple of really effective things, and there are not that many options available, sadly. And I'll talk a little bit about that. The healthcare worker situation is really sad, right? And that's one of the reasons that you see a lot of carefulness in the U.S. government policy, because they don't want to, get to a point where all these healthcare workers are leaving. And I took this from a lady who's a friend of mine's presentation, and she said the reason that people are so upset, and she's a medical doctor, in her presentation, was that they don't, they're looking at the politics of it, and they're feeling like they're being defeated by the politics rather than the medicine. And that's not the reason they went into healthcare. They want to practice the best medicine possible, and they feel like their hands are tied. So we're giving Ada Hutchinson all of his options, and the problem is the guys in the front line are seeing that those options aren't working and are confused about why they're not allowed or not, why they're not allowed to be in a more protected environment. And they're all leaving, right? I mean, if you're sitting there and you're working on a roof and you're not forced to wear all of the workers around you aren't harnessed in, you're in a really dangerous situation of having a lot of people fall off the roof. And they're looking at that saying, if we're having to, constantly treat unvaccinated people, and 85% of the people who they're treating are unvaccinated, even though they represent less than half the population. 85% of the people in the hospital right now are unvaccinated. And so these guys are just they're frustrated, right? The healthcare workers are super frustrated, and so they're leaving. As a result of that, when you look at how much capacity we had in 2019, when I first did the analysis, I thought we had enough people to take care of us at 7,000 cases a day. Today, it's only about 5,000 cases a day that we could take care of if we hit that. So that's a real problem. And the other big problem we're having is data. As a result of all these states having their own laws, their own option to do whatever they want to do and report the way they want to report them, we actually don't have any data sets to actually see what's going on in the field. And that's something that, policymakers need. And I try to use, and you can see one of the things that you want to look at when you're figuring out your own risk about doing certain things is about what the positivity rate is in your own area, right? So if you're walking around, downtown Detroit where the positivity rate is pretty high, you're going to have to take a different set of steps to protect yourself than if you're, especially if you're going to a bar inside, which I wouldn't recommend anyone doing right now, versus if you're walking outside, without anyone around you in Oklahoma. The problem is we don't actually know what the positivity rates are in either of those areas for extended periods of time. There's a lot of problem with data latency. There's also a problem of reporting apples to apples. So we can't see what it's like in Michigan versus Oklahoma because they report in different ways at different times. And some of these states don't even report them at all. So we don't even know what they are, and yet these positivity rates, if you want to figure out what your own risk is, you look at your age, you look at your health, you look at where you're walking around, you look at how many people you're going to be meeting and working and involved with, and you look at the vaccination rates of those people and know their health status. That's and then what activity you're doing. Those 3 or 4 things control how much risk you're putting yourself at. And if I can't even know how much virus there is in my community effectively, or if I fly to somewhere and I don't know what the virus levels are in that community, I can't protect myself effectively. So we don't even have enough data for people to act properly in this new Omicron era. And so that's the first problem the CDC and FDA and all these groups and the US government are having, is they don't get the data, they don't control the data. It's all reported by state, and the states report them in different ways at different times with different methods. And this is an example of how we're having. This is a Johns Hopkins example. I work quite a bit with Johns Hopkins, and we just can't even figure out the testing levels that we're having right now. And now we're adding to that, by the way, all people doing this testing at home. Next big issue we've got, and you heard the FDA saying, hey, great news, we're going to move from a 6-month booster shot environment to a 5-month booster shot environment based on the data. Well, here is the data, right? And you can see that in 6 months, at 160 days, you're talking about this level of immunity, right? Of waning in the 2-shot sequence. That, if you can see where I'm, on 160 days, that's where it is. And you can see that the FDA itself said, when vaccines become under 50% effective, we're not going to consider them effective. Remember that? When they said that's our hurdle for getting approval. That was back last year when they said, what level do we want to see effectiveness? Well, 50% is sort of the baseline. Well, shoot, if that's their baseline, then they're under it. They missed it for this policy, and that's why people are so confused, because they're not consistent in their policies. And you can see that this is really critical, because here, these waning factors really drop off sharply. And if you're an older person, they drop off more rapidly than if you're a younger person, a lot more rapidly. And so our most vulnerable people who are most likely to die actually need to have boosters probably every 4 months. So probably another 3 or 4 months, they'll come back and say, we agree with the rest of the world, because by the way, the rest of the world believes that it's 4 months and have already put in policies for 4 months. And the problem is that if these things like 2 months, how much of a difference can that make? Well, it makes a 3-fold increase in cases. And so these kind of what seem to be compromises, and we don't want to rock the boat too much, and we don't want to really have a huge impact. on people's health. And it's disappointing, that we're not vaccinated as much as we are, and that we're not offering boosters in the sequence that we need them fast enough. So even today, they're about 2 months behind where Israel is. How is that possible that we're that far behind with our policy? And I'm sure that in a few more months, we'll probably say, oh, we made a little mistake. Sorry about that. And we have three times more cases than we need to in the United States. We'll go to 4-month boosters, but they should know this already. The data is already there, and it's disappointing. And you can see that here, if you're an elderly person, here's your case rates, right? So you can get a sense of generally what we say is if you're not vaccinated, that you'll probably be about 10 times more likely to be hospitalized and about 20 times more likely to die. Overall. Now, what's interesting about Omicron is it's a little bit less virulent, we think. And the reason that we can say that is because we can look at, and you can see it's a little bit early to say that, but here's the difference, Mike, between patients who are entering the hospital versus patients on a ventilator. And you expect that we're going to start to see this orange creep up into the blue a lot more as we start to get people sicker and sicker. Unfortunately, we don't see that yet. So we think, aha, and that's possible. But of course, these orange peaks are a little bit delayed from the blues. And so we might start to see a pickup. I would expect we do. But the good news is it looks like Omicron is a little bit, in the real world, in the United States, is a little bit less virulent possibly than the Delta virus was. And what's interesting is here we actually looked at, this is true about animals studies as well. So here are all the different tests we've done to check this. And you can see that basically each time we saw a decreased lung infectivity. So what's interesting is there's a special mode of action that we think Omicron uses, and it involves the temper SS2 pathway. And what's interesting about this is that for Delta, they required an activation through temper of the ACE receptor in order for the Delta to attack itself. Omicron doesn't require that activation, so it can be effective in areas that don't have an activated temper SS2 pathway, and so it actually infects a lot more, right, at a point of 10x more, we think, than Delta did. What's interesting is that same pathway is in your lungs, and in your lower lungs, the temper S2 pathway is a little bit more active, and so the temper S2 pathway is actually pulling the virus into the lower part of your lungs and making you more ill. That's what really causes a lot of the death. And what's interesting is that Omicron doesn't have that pulling effect, and so we think that it stays more in your upper respiratory tract than your lower respiratory tract. So that explains possibly why this effect that we're seeing of a slightly lower death rate for Omicron, probably about 30% lower death rate, sadly about a 5-fold increase in overall infectiveness, is maybe as a result of the same set of mutations. So there's some consistency there, which is causing us to be a little bit more hopeful. Now, the next big question was about how long we should isolate. Remember, if you find out that you are,
the CDC's gone back and forth between 10 days and 5 days. Now we're at 5 days.
Yep, we're at 5 days now, and they said that's based on the data. Well, so here's what the data actually was that they used, and you can see that actually the green dots are let's take a look over on the Schedule E. See that over here on the upper right hand corner? Mm-hmm. There you can see that basically, sure enough, after about 5.5 days or so, it looks like the vast majority of all of those the counts of the virus are going down, and it looks, if we had to make a judgment about it, yes, you're about 80%, probably even more, are okay after 5.5 days. And so, and if you wear a mask, for the next 5 days after that, yeah, that probably makes some sense. And sure enough, in the UK and in Europe, they say, yeah, 5 days is enough, but we want you to take a test, which takes 2 more days. So they're at 7 days. So they're right at about here. And you see that difference right here versus where we are? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Big difference, right? So they're taking a lot less chances by asking for that test. Now let's look at that's the vaccinated part of the population, and Europe is, a lot more vaccinated than we are. They're up at 70, 73, 74, 75, 80% frequently, and well, we're still at 62. Here's the unvaccinated people, right? And you can see that well over half of the unvaccinated people, after 5 days, they're still spreading like crazy. So what we should have said is, if you're vaccinated and you wear a mask after 5 days, great news, you go back to work. If you're unvaccinated, 10 days is probably still the right number. And even after that, you should probably wear a mask. But we didn't do that. And now we're going to have to go back, and they'll say, we've been thinking about this, and you probably need to have some tests before you go back to, and if they don't make a distinction between vaccinated and unvaccinated, we're going to have to run on tests. And then we're going to have bad policy again, where everyone is going to be unable to go back to work because they can't get the test. And you can just see this coming, and yet the administration keeps, we're tripping over ourselves, sadly. So you can get a sense of this, and you can see that G, in graph G, just how much more on the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated are in terms of clearance times, in terms of viral load. So. Again and again and again, we're seeing that they claim they're using data, but the data has been, saturated with politics that cause them to be either make policy decisions that aren't appropriate, or create policy decisions that are then walked back by groups that want to take it to court and slow things down. And I'm not sure what their motivation is, but it's disappointing because we could have had a much better handle on this, and had actually been a lot freer and more confident about what we're doing with our lives if we just have a little more leadership. We haven't gotten that. And you can see here is positive days, and sure enough, it does peak after 5 days, but it continues on to day 8, 9, 10, which is why you want to wear the mask in this period, and you certainly want to have for unvaccinated, you want to have a test, a negative test. Europe requires 2 negative tests, so that pushes you out to 7 days before you're allowed to be released. So, and here's why these vaccinations are so important. So this is the state of Massachusetts, and this is pretty recent data. This is published, I guess, 2 or 3 days ago. Unvaccinated individuals are 31 times more likely to be infected with COVID than boosted people. 31 more, and this is before Omicron. This is before Omicron really gets started. We just started to have, you can start to see what happened, right? November 28th is when Omicron started to hit, and so you can see that before, it was down to maybe 10 times. Now with Omicron, it's 31 times. So it's really important to be vaccinated and boosted, because this piece here, this is about 25, this is 250, so you're 10 times more likely, if you're not boosted, to come down with this Omicron virus, and if you are boosted versus unvaccinated, 31 times more likely. So here it is, 6 times. So if you're fully vaccinated but not boosted, you're 6 times more likely to become infected. And that's about as much, that's about as big as a difference as being fully vaccinated versus unvaccinated, quote unquote, fully vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And that's another area of confusion, right? We're saying fully vaccinated is two shots, right? That's quote unquote fully vaccinated. That's not fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated means you've been boosted, because if you're not boosted, you're not fully vaccinated. And so we're going to have lots of confusion about that too. So here the difference is 6x from boosted to fully vaccinated, quote unquote fully vaccinated. There's a 6x difference, and then if you're fully vaccinated but versus unvaccinated, it's 5x more likely to be be infected. Those are really, you can get a real sense of this in real life, how important it is to get that booster shot. Overall, we had 823,000 deaths between in the last 2 years, but if we hadn't had a vaccine, we would have had another 1 million people die, which is just and we've averted 35,000 infections, and we've averted 10 million hospitalizations. So if you think about that, 10 million hospitalizations, we only have 10,000 hospitals in the whole country. Well, actually about 5,000 hospitals in the whole country, excuse me. So you can get a sense of, that's 2,000 people, and that's divided by 300. We're talking about hundreds of people a day per hospital. Imagine just how much more pressure we would have had on a hospital system if we hadn't had a vaccine. So there are some side effects. These side effects are very small. Moderna, you've got to worry a little bit about myocarditis if you are a male between 18 and 24. All other people don't have to worry about that. And in those cases, if you're a male between 18 and 24, that's the highest risk group you've got. We had 39 cases out of 1 million. So and you can treat myocarditis. It's a swelling of the lining of the heart, and we can treat that. So you're talking about something on the order of 4 cases per 100,000 people, versus getting the disease, which is pretty bad, of 1,250 cases if you remain unvaccinated because of that concern you've got. You do have thrombosis and thrombocytopenia syndrome following the Janssen. That's a J&J vaccine. That's only for 30 to 39-year-old females. And they had 10 cases per million, 1 case per 100,000. So if you're avoiding getting vaccinated, you've got 1,200 times. You've got about 125 cases in 1 million. 1,200. Sorry, you've got 12,000 cases per million versus 10 cases per million of having this issue at the peak of your risk level if you're a female between 30 and 39. You have Guillain-Barré syndrome, Guillain-Barré syndrome following Janssen, 16 cases per million. So again, if you're truly concerned about those side effects, they are very, very rare, only for certain age groups. And your chances of getting COVID and having really something terrible happen to you are much, much higher than avoiding these safety issues. And again, we've injected these vaccines over 7 billion times. So you get a sense of just how safe these vaccines are around the world. What's interesting is that if you are vaccinated and you have a breakthrough case, you are as likely to you are as infectious as somebody who has not been vaccinated. So be sure you do wear your mask. You can see the attack rates are slightly lower, but they're in the same order of magnitude in the same household, which is where most of the virus does spread. We're worried about children, and this is a study out of China. Let me make this a little bit smaller, so you can get a sense of this. But here in a case of this is a study prior to the new the Omicron virus, and you can see how 2 children actually gave the virus to 250 people. And this is why
two children to 260, you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's the family. Here are the 2 children in the middle. Those are the red squares. And this is how it moved from the family across all the families. This is why we're so concerned about the children who are still not vaccinatable under the age of 5. They are unlikely to show any symptoms, and they're likely to spread it very, very rapidly.
So having just gone through the holidays, various holidays, various religions, where the families were gathering, are you anticipating in a couple of weeks we'll see something or not?
Oh yeah, that was the first slide. That was
Way back. Oh, okay. Yeah, we're in
you
2 weeks.
remember
Yeah,
that
right.
that
Okay.
was my adjustment. Whoops. Right. Here's what we were thought before.
Right.
Adjustment is the blue line. That's in the green, and the blue line is what we think now.
Okay.
It's going to be really bad. Yeah, is the answer. And right now we're trying to decide whether to bring children back to school. I think it would have been smart to have had a, we can because of the low vaccination rate among sadly among kids right now. There's still only about 50% for those over between 5 and 18. I think we should have had an extended winter break and just waited for 3 weeks. That really changed the equation. It's because we didn't do that. I think we'll still have a nice ramp down, a very rapid ramp down, but it would have been even faster and it wouldn't have achieved the peak that it did. The other good thing about vaccines is it does reduce the likelihood of long COVID by about 50%. So the chance of having a breakthrough case after 6 months is about 0.7%. And you can see that the COVID, the long COVID is reduced by about half. And what's interesting is that if you have COVID and haven't been vaccinated, we've started to see more and more evidence of COVID infecting endothelial cells, and you can see that actually is causing significant cognitive. It's actually we're actually able to see this now with diagnostic tools that we've got for that where you have the endothelial being infected. You actually have cells being affected for its ability to remember things and recall in 24% of people. And you can actually image this effect. And that was just published in JAMA last month. What's interesting is there's sort of two camps now that are starting to come. One says, oh, everyone's going to get Omicron, so you might as well just, and it's not as much to worry about. It'll be less severe. And you don't have to worry about this third booster shot at all. And the Pavlovid pill isn't really going to be that important. And the truth is that right now we're going through a very high peak, and it's worth actually avoiding some of the risks of this very high peak if you can. Unfortunately, we've just gone through Christmas. And Christmas was the ultimate part of that peak, but we're going to see that starts to go down. So for if you want to start getting when will you start getting your life back again? If you decide you want to avoid this because you've got significant concerns about your health, you've got preconditions, you're a little bit more older. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. It'll be around in the springtime. So just shut yourself in the winter. Have a nice time, relax, and then in the springtime, it'll be a lot safer to move around. We'll also have a lot more of these new drugs that are coming out that'll actually help you out. Here's the booster data. Now, people were concerned about boostering. Don't be concerned about boostering. Here is just how much more effective a booster versus a non-boosted environment is. What they did is they boosted, in this case, several 100,000 people versus they didn't boost several 100,000 people, and you can see that what the impact is. 18.65 times mortality rate. This is death rates in the Delta virus populations. Just how much fewer people had this. And the nice thing about these boosters is they come onto effect within about 7 or 8 days of having them. You don't have to. You can see that the separation starts at about day 12 and really just flattens out completely. After that, you don't have to wait a month or 2 months in order to get the full impact of it. This shows you. I think I showed you this curve prior about the neutralizing antibody levels, and you can get a sense of just how important these antibodies are. I think convalescent antibodies will become for Omicron will become important in the next month. After that, will be less important because they have a wide range of impact. But you can get a sense of the CoronaVac. That's the vaccine that's done in China. How much less effective it is versus the mRNA vaccine. So if you're and the adenovirus vaccines are in the middle there, around 70+ % effective, and the mRNA vaccines are up in the top part of that curve. So you get a sense of just how effective these vaccines are, even against the Delta variant. And these kinds of efficacy is also being seen at about the same rate for Omicron. Here's the demographics. You see everybody in these boosters you know, you can find yourself, I think, in this demographic. The safety was so high that basically we saw a lot more adverse events in the placebo group than we did in the actual vaccinated group. So with the, you know, so it's a very, boosting is actually a very safe thing to do. And it's very, very effective. 20 times more effective than not boosting. And here's why you need it, because you can see that 3 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, you can see what that the purple is Omicron, and you can see just how low the second dose effect is. Those on the left, you've got how much tighter you have in your immune response. And this is a logarithmic response, so 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and you can get a sense of just how low it is against Omicron versus if you got boosted. There's that 25% improvement with the booster, and this is what Pfizer actually presented to the FDA. Now, so suppose you get the disease. The way we treat the disease today is with monoclonal antibodies, and you can see that unfortunately, there's only one monoclonal antibody that is approved. If you look at this column, you can see that the less than 10 means that that's an ineffective, means ineffective neutralizing antibody response. So these two, the bamlanivimab and the Epidemiologist are Lilly's drugs. They don't work. Regeneron's drugs don't work. The C102 also is a small company's drug that doesn't work. It's been approved in some countries. The only one that works is sotrovimab. Sotrovimab is a GSK Vir antibody. It's I think there are 200,000 doses in the United States available right now. If you can get a hold of that, if you've got the disease, that will save you. The rest of them, all the other monoclonal antibodies, if you are diagnosed with Omicron, will not help you. If you're diagnosed with Delta, which is about a 30% chance right now, then Lilly, Regeneron, and the C102 monoclonals will all help you, as well as, of course, the GSK Vir, the sotrovimab, and the Fab and the Good will all help you. But if you're with Omicron, then you've got to ask for sotrovimab, which is the GSK Vir. There are a lot of failed antivirals that you've heard about. Favipiravir was thought to be something that would be very impactful, and sadly in November they just looked at a clinical trial that didn't work. And as of course, ivermectin doesn't work, lopinavir doesn't work, hydroxychloroquine does not work, olanzapine doesn't work. So these are antivirals that it's unlikely that a doctor will prescribe, but if they do, ask for something that does work, and that's a sotrovimab. Possibly convalescent antibodies for Omicron itself are also good. There are a lot of failed monoclonal antibodies. Here are the ones that we already went through that aren't working very well. So those are and here's all the data. If you want to see the data, get a sense of. We have the wild type versus Omicron. We want to have the only thing that there's only one that really that's really working in that space, which we already talked about. So we're fighting this big war, and we have insufficient numbers of rapid antibody tests. We're trying to achieve 200 to 500 million a month, right? That's what we're trying to say. We need 10 to 15 times that to really test everybody that we need to. So if we're not doing that effectively, what we need to do is have a national strategy that says, here's how we're going to go after and surveil this appropriately. Right now, We'll produce about 613 million coronavirus tests, including 243 million rapid antibody tests, and the rest are PCR. And so you can get a sense of the prophylactic testing, which is saying, I think I was exposed, let me test myself. And the surveillance testing, which says, let's go ahead and randomly surveil a whole bunch of groups, aren't being done. And so we really don't know where this virus is. We also can't tell whether you've got Omicron or Delta very easily yet. That's taking a long time. You need about 10 times more of the capacity there. Paxlovid is a great drug. If you have a chance of getting your hands on Paxlovid, we'll have about 200,000 of those, and we'll have probably 30 million by the end of the month of January. So if people have access to that, ask your doctor, ask your hospital for that. It's also, you can take it prophylactically, which means I think I was exposed, let me take this in advance of getting sick. You can do that, but with it, you need to be able to be tested within 3 days. So make sure you get your test results very rapidly and then get Paxlovid as soon as you can. Right now, we don't have enough N95 masks. We have about 45 million per month. If we really wanted to have everybody wearing N95 masks effectively, we need 1.5 billion per month. That would be the way N95 masks are being used, which is after you use them, you throw them away. Right now, what we're doing is we're using them even for our first line workers. And that's disappointing, and that's why they're quitting. Boosters, we need 100% of people who are vaccinated to be boosted every 4 months. And right now we're doing it at about 20% every 6 months. And sotrovimab, which we just went through, we had 50,000 doses in December. We'll have 350,000 doses in January. Right now we have about 200,000 doses. We'll need, and they've committed to 80 million doses in the year next year. So we need more of those as well. So what basically I'm saying is that if you come down with this, and so our first line of defense is vaccines, they're very effective, and you want to be boosted every 4 months. And if you can mix and match them, with get Pfizer and then get a Moderna shot is better than 2 Pfizers, or get Moderna and then Pfizer is better than 2 Moderna shots. They call it heterogenic strategy. So we have our vaccines. And the things in green are things that are working for Omicron. The things that are yellow is we're not really, it's only partially effective. And you can see Oxford has decided not to pursue Omicron. J&J will likely. Novavax was just approved. In Japan will be approved for here shortly. You can see that all these monoclonal, so that's our vaccine situation. Get your vaccine, because if you get sick, you can see here are all the things we have to work. These are all the drugs that your doctor can possibly, that have been approved for and demonstrated to be effective. Of those drugs that were effective, now we only have 3. So, for the Roche Actemra, it's only 30% effective, and that's if you're dying. So you don't want to have the Roche, the Roche intervention. You do want to have, if you can get it, the Paxlovid, and if you're not a pregnant lactating mother, molnupiravir, Merck's drug, also can be effective, but it's only about 30% effective versus Pfizer's Paxlovid, which is much safer, has some contraindications if you're taking other drugs, but is much safer and is 90% effective. So those are your options if you go to a medical doctor. And you can see we don't really have much to fight Omicron right now. So that's it for that discussion, Mike. I've got a little discussion, if you want, about the supply chain, if you're interested. But I see I haven't been as efficient as I wanted to.
How long will it take to run that if you did it? So.
Oh, it'd probably take 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, let's save that for the next time, because we're already at about an hour mark. So
yeah.
All right, let me ask you. I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, and there's so many variables out there. What does 2022 look like? I mean, are we going to, after Omicron, is there going to be another one, do you think, or what? I mean, it's hard for people to understand what's going on, that these viruses are so smart that they're adapting essentially to our countermeasures, right?
So, yeah, I think there will be other variants of concern because we're just not effective globally the way we need to. So we'll find other variants that are being developed in other parts of the world, and they're going to come back and get us until, and I think that's going to be the case for about 5 years. And in about five, sadly, in about between 5 and 10 years, I hope that the vaccines become standard for children. And what's interesting about the childhood vaccines is they're incredibly effective and they're very durable. And it may not be the exact same vaccines as we have today because we're constantly evolving them. But I think that will be our chance to eventually gain control. Slowly but surely, we'll still have a little bit of I hope it'll become less and less potent and virulent. But the only way to really control this will be in about 5 years when we start to vaccinate every child under the age of 2. At that point, that will be the point where we really gain control. Until that point, we are going to have to live with this, and it will become much more seasonal. You'll see this really, and in Michigan especially, it'll look like, gosh, lots to worry about, kind of between Halloween and January 15th, and then it'll start to come back down again. So you'll see a lot more of that variation, and then we'll see periodic blips like we saw with Delta, which was disappointing, that get by us. Hopefully, hopefully that people will start to get vaccinated, because that's the only chance you really have of making sure that you're in an environment that's safe, that isn't replicating, mutating viruses. What is nice though is that we will have Paxlovid, and Paxlovid will be able to take care of unvaccinated people as long as they get tested fast. So we have to build up our testing environment much more so that people who are unvaccinated can get a drug that can save them. Because right now, it's just come to market. We'll have 80 million doses this year. We'll need 60 million of them in the United States just to control people who are unvaccinated who get infected.
Okay, so the new normal is what is the new normal? I guess hard to say. Just that we'll be battling this for some time to come.
We are going to be battling this for some. We missed our chance to eliminate it, but we haven't missed our chance to make it a manageable disease that we can live with. And and I think we hopefully will get down to that below 100,000 average rate of cases, and we'll have Paxlovid and other drugs you can take if you're diagnosed fast enough, like with Tamiflu, and you get that drug taken, and then at least you won't die. Right now, the unvaccinated are sadly likely to get this disease, and if you're older, likely to die.
On that happy note,
I wish it was better news.
All right, Fred, we'd like to invite you back next month for an update. This is so much changes in a month. Can we get you on the show next month?
That'd be great. Yeah, we can talk a little about the supply chain. I think people will be interested in the supply chain and what I do. I'm working with the FDA to help them with make sure that our supply chains don't get interrupted on the medical side, and a lot of that transfers back to the toys you buy for your kids, and the auto industry and everything else. We can talk about supply chain next time if you want.
Sure.